Hey everyone, Chris here, the RC Geek, and in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about sound systems because I've played with a couple sound systems, mostly the ones from Model Sounds Inc. I've been really happy with those, and so I wanted to go through and show you with the Legend Hobby 85 Skyraider what I did in terms of the installation. Now, with respect to the model itself, it is a prototype for a future kit. Should be available sometime in June, hopefully. It's an 86-inch wingspan, and the model weighs about 30 pounds overall. I'm running a 12S electric setup with a Scorpion 5535 160 kV motor, 12S 7000s, and then pulling it, I've got a 2014 4-blade Vela propeller that looks awesome on there. It's a really fantastic setup for the airplane. It pulls it beautifully. Now, the nice thing with the Legend Hobby Skyraider, the motor installation was super simple. Scorpion makes a set of standoffs that equate to 60cc and 30cc motors. And so as a result, all you have to do is purchase the right standoffs. And these are the 60cc standoffs that I installed in the model. And then literally just drill and screw it all into place. And so once the motor was installed, I 3D printed a dual row radial engine, and that came from Thingiverse. It's a design by Wilm Racer. He's also on YouTube. You can check him out here, but it's a really fantastic design. I scaled it up to fit within the cowl as it should, and then from there I did have to remove the gear cover that's at the center of the engine because the whole center is replaced by the actual motor itself. And so I used a soldering iron to cut that off, and then Dremel to grind it out and hollow it out as much as I could to get a nice tight clearance around the electric motor. It took quite a bit of custom fitting because the way that the standoffs work and the way that the engine really wanted to be placed in the model, I had to do quite a bit of grinding with the Dremel, and so just took my time there. And once I got that all set and the spacing correct, I did some painting on that engine. So just some dry brushing with silver to get the cooling fins to really pop, and then painted the center engine gray, and then that was more or less it. I hot glued that 3D printed engine onto the standoffs. It's a little janky with the hot glue, but it works great. And if I ever needed to take it off, I can pop it free if I have to. Once I had that all situated, I needed to install the sound system, of course. And so before we even talk about the actual installation itself, the ideal installation for a sound system is to have no blockage between the speaker and the open air. So ideally it's in a place on the airplane pointing downwards, and you have just a screen that's covering the speaker itself. Now, I didn't want to cut the bottom of the airplane in any way and install a screen, so I ended up installing the speakers into the cowl area. This also helped me out for the CG because I knew that I was going to need as much weight as far forward as possible. And so what I ended up doing is I glued some balsa blocks onto the firewall assembly on the side there, angled them as I needed to get a nice little bevel so that the speaker would tilt forward slightly, and then I created a cross brace that I hot glued to the motor standoffs, and then that gave a third attachment point for the speakers, and so they're nice and rigid in there. You could do a fourth attachment point, but really there's no vibration here, so the 3 is more than sufficient. So the way that the Model Sounds Inc. systems work, if you've got a single speaker, you can run it on 3 cells, and then if you have 2 speakers, you can run it on 6 cells, and those speakers actually have to get wired in series to each other, which then connects to the controller itself. So once I had the speakers in, I had to solder the power leads to the speakers themselves appropriately. So connecting them in series, I soldered the negative wire on one speaker and then took the positive wire connected that to the negative wire on the other speaker, and then took the positive wire to the controller itself. So I had, the positive, negative going, but the two speakers then connected in series. And it's just like if you're connecting two LiPo batteries together as well, it's the same exact way. And then once I had that situated, I had to power it. And so you can run a separate battery if you want. That's probably the most ideal, because then you're not pulling power from your flight packs or anything like that. But I ended up just pulling the power from one of the flight batteries. And so I modified a IC5 connector such that I could solder the positive and negative leads into the connector itself and then feed them out. And so then those wires then connected to the controller for the sound system. So that way when I plug in my batteries, it automatically powers up the sound system, and so I'm good to go there. Once that's all together, that's more or less it. You can do some tuning on the controller if you find that the system isn't responding in a way that you would expect. You can manually set the throttle range, or you can set up the system on a separate switch, so you turn it on and off that way. And so that's all shown in the manual. It talks about how to do that. I ended up doing a manual setup where I manually set the throttle, and so that way it's just all controlled there. And so with the cowl off and the sound system running, it is insanely loud in my garage. Interestingly enough, as soon as I put the cowl on, it does tone it down significantly. And that's where I go back to, the ideal installation is an open air type, because the sound waves are directional. So if there's something in the way, it's going to muffle the sound. There's no way to get around that. For me, I don't mind that. You can hear it on the startup, during the taxi. On the approach, you can hear the engine idling, and then of course taxiing back. If I were to do this in an aircraft that I built from the ground up, I might integrate it in a little bit better way, so that I get the most amount of sound out of it. But for this model and for what I want to do, it works really great. When we talk about sound systems, there's all kinds of different options out there. And so I've been really happy with the Model Sounds Inc. ones. They're extremely loud, and he's got different designs. You can do single speaker, dual speaker, or he's got an exciter setup that you can do as well, that really just resonates the whole airframe. Having these options for electric aircraft, it's kind of the next best thing if you can't afford or have a large enough airframe for an awesome radial engine. Obviously, you'll never be able to replace that true sound, but it's a reasonable facsimile anyways. All right, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to follow along on social media at the RC Geek. Subscribe, and if you'd like to find out how I paint and weather my models, check out the tutorial here. And until next time, I'll see you at the field.